Alright, let's talk about one of my favorite concepts, and that is the concept of wisdom. Wisdom is often used in the same sentence as knowledge, but they are not the same thing. You have to have knowledge to have wisdom, but you don't have to have wisdom to have knowledge. So they're not mutually exclusive, they are two separate things, although knowledge is a part of wisdom. But wisdom also includes skills in life. So again, wisdom is not just knowing information, it's knowing information and how to use it. A lot of times you hear people say that wisdom comes with age, and while that can be true, as you'll see in just a second, it's not always. So please don't believe that wisdom automatically comes with age, or that you have to have lived a long time to have wisdom. There's certainly a relationship, but again, one is not directly connected to the other. So the first thing I want to talk about are four components of wisdom, and the first is factual information. So, in theory, this is why we go to school, this is why we have education. And indeed, the more knowledge you have about the world, the things that you know, the more wisdom you have. In psychology, we would refer to this as declarative memory, specifically semantic declarative memory, because it's factual information that everybody has access to. And the more of it you have, in theory, the more wisdom you have. But the second part of that is procedural knowledge or procedural information. In psychological terms, we sometimes call that procedural memory. So we're talking about skills, not just knowing information, but knowing how to use it. So maybe you know all about how to drive, you've taken the tests, you've read the manuals, but until you've actually had years behind the wheel, you haven't learned how to anticipate situations, things that might come up, and how to use those skills in everyday life. So the first two components that we've talked about is factual information and then procedural information. The third is relativism. This is understanding that your factual information and your procedural information is unique to you, at least in the way that you've learned it. Now again, the fact that I know that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president and you know that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president, we have the same piece of information, but we've learned it in ways that is unique to us. So relativism just involves acknowledging that. That can involve your age, that can involve your location, that can involve your culture, your religion, your time that you've lived, in other words, the decade that you've lived. So there's so many things that are unique to you, and the moment you learn that information, that's what relativism is. It's just the understanding that you have experienced the world differently than everybody else. So you can't expect them to have the same perspective that you do, as we sometimes often do in our culture. The fourth and final component is that of uncertainty. It's my favorite component, and I always in my classes say, if you think you already know everything, then there's nothing you could learn, even if you're wrong. So uncertainty is in part due to that relativism. Since you've only viewed the world through your perspective, and since there are billions of perspectives you could have viewed the world from, there's no way you could be certain about everything. In fact, if you're going to be a true critical thinker, a true skeptic, you've got to be willing to admit you could be wrong about everything, even the things that you hold to be universally true. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to live your life wallowing in uncertainty, but it's just the awareness that, I know a lot, I've lived a lot, but it's only my perspective, and there may be information out there that somebody has that I don't have access to. Oh, it would be so great if during political season we saw so much of that, but we usually see that much. Alright, let's talk about three areas of well-being, because ideally in life, the more wisdom that you create and the more wisdom that you have, the better able you are to live a life full of meaning and happiness. So I want to talk about three areas of well-being that are sometimes linked to high levels of wisdom. The first is that of adjustment. Now we've talked about adjustment in this class before, several times actually. Many of the difficult situations that we discussed, we said that life is not easy, that we all go through difficult things. And so having a healthy, happy life doesn't mean you don't have problems or difficulties. It means you have them, but you learn how to adjust. You learn coping skills. Coping skills are a huge part of adjustment. So again, not avoiding negativity, but experiencing it and dealing with it. That is one area that can contribute to a healthy life. The second is that of relationships. So again, we've talked about the importance of social relationships, and that's what we're talking about here. It does not have to be romantic relationships, but the idea is that you have people in your life that can support you, that you can support, that you can learn from, that can learn from you, and vice versa. And then finally, the idea of growth. People who report high levels of well-being aren't really stagnant. They feel like they're making the most of their life because they're trying new experiences. Again, they're willing to admit there are things they don't know, and so they go out into the world in pursuit of that knowledge. So adjustment, relationships, and growth are three areas that can contribute to well-being. One of my favorite ways to contribute to well-being, and personally with a lot of the research I've read recently, I feel very strongly that this technique I'm going to talk about is so important in helping us develop and share wisdom. And that is strengthening your personal narrative. Narrative education is huge right now. I've always been a fan of it because I learned a lot through comic books and movies and music. So the idea is that when you share your story, someone else can learn from that. And they're learning from your facts and what you've been through, but they're also learning your perspective. So I'm a huge fan of expressing your narrative. To do that, you have to understand it. So I want to tell you 4 strategies that can strengthen your personal narrative. The first is detailing your narrative. So thinking about your life. Some people do this more so than others. Sometimes I'll have students come into class and I'll say, tell me your most vivid memory, or tell me the favorite thing you've ever done. And people can't readily come up with an idea for that. That's okay, I'm not judging that. But the more you think about the past, the more you think about your experiences, the more insight you get into your life and what your story has been. Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram has been great about sharing all these memories with us. So it's actually easier to get the details in our lives, but we also have to be careful with how we frame them, which kind of leads me into the second strategy for strengthening your personal narrative, and that is questioning it. So in psychology, we talk a lot about the concept of constructive processing. What that means is your memory is not a video recorder. Video recorders, do they still do that? It's not a video recorder that chronicles every moment of your life objectively and accurately. Your memory is constantly updating itself, changing itself based on new information, based on retrieval of old information, based on information from outside sources, based on your emotion, based on the chemicals you put into your body. So your memory, your narrative is constantly changing. So if we're really trying to attach meaning to our narratives, we have to question it. We have to question the trueness of our memories. We have to question our motives for the things that we've done. We have to question what else was happening in our environment that contributed to a situation. So I'm a huge fan of questioning in general, and psychologists usually are. But in terms of your narrative, it's not just enough to remember the details. You want to question. You want to get as much information about that as you can, but also make sure it has a wide berth. It's not just your limited perspective. It has been challenged and questioned to the point that you're pretty confident you have an accurate and objective view of your narrative. The third is to undramatize. I'm not sure if that's a word, I'm making it a word, but we have to undramatize our narrative. In adolescence, we tend to actually do really well at our personal narrative. We are learning at a time in our life when we have so much social pressure, so much biological change, and so we feel pretty strongly that our life is very similar to a novel where we are the hero and all these challenges are coming at us. The problem is in our teenage years, we tend to dramatize the heck out of that, and that's why we sometimes react very severely emotionally to things that as adults we don't really find that dramatic. But in terms of our personal narrative, it helps to undramatize it and to take out all of the strong emotions that you feel looking back may not have been relevant. So your first breakup may have been devastating for you, and it may have been months and months of crying and dealing and stressing and all these things. But looking back on it, to really make it useful, you've got to kind of strip away some of that emotional heaviness. That allows you to objectively look at it in a way that can benefit other people. Just think about this in terms of conversation. If you're talking about things you've been through and the person is sharing a memory and all of a sudden they kind of lose touch with reality and start going into the emotions of it and how powerful and painful it still is, you can disconnect from that person because they're still attaching that severe emotional response. That's kind of a segue to the fourth way to strengthen your personal narrative, and that is to connect. Connect it to other people. Yes, Humanistic psychology has been a huge impact on me. So we are all individuals, and I just said a few moments ago that we each have a unique subjective perception of the world. Truly believe that. But it's when we can find the similarities in our narratives that we really can understand people in general and understand each other. I may have been through this in my own unique way, but if I can listen to your story, see where that similarity is, and connect with you, that is a wealth of things. It helps me understand your perspective. It can strengthen our relationship. It may better help me understand my perspective. And the more people I connect with, the better understanding I have of life in general. And that can benefit me as well. I've always been very curious as to the songs that do well in terms of chart performance. So what is it about a song that resonates with people? Obviously, a lot of times it's the music. Obviously, a lot of times it's the publicity, the money that's put behind the tune. But a lot of times songs just transform and reach out into the world, and it just grabs people by huge numbers. And I personally believe when that happens, that song has connected in such a way that unites all these subjective perceptions. And that's truly when you have a cultural phenomenon of a song. So that's the information I have to impart to you on wisdom, and I hope you have found it useful.